Welcome back to PM Agenda and welcome to our panel. We're joined, and this is a little odd, from here in Canberra by the New South Wales Labor Senator Sam Dastyari.
Great to be here.
In Sydney, the ACT Liberal Senator Seselja. Thanks for both of you for being in each other's cities. But
Pleasure.
anyway,
Thanks,
let's start
G'day,
with
Sam.
let's start Sam Dastyari with you. Paul Howe's speech at the press club today. You were there watching on. What did you think of this speech and the sort of things he had to say about the idea of a grand compact?
I've got to say I thought it was fantastic. It was one of the most visionary speeches I've heard given in the Labor movement for a long time. I think the point that Paul was making, this whole idea that we have to get off this whole merry-go-round when it comes to industrial relations, that it's time for us to actually sit down and work out some kind of compact, was brilliant.
So you agree with that?
Well, I think so. I think the principle that you can't have this kind of seesaw in policy, that there has to be some kind of certainty. And for there to be policy certainty, then you need the trade union movement and business to actually work out some rules of engagement and not just have a Labor government, Liberal government, Labor government, Liberal government, and have changing policies.
Sure. To achieve a compact, both sides need to make concessions, as he said, and he nominated unsustainable wage rises in some sectors. Have there been unsustainable wage rises?
Well, look, I mean, Paul pointed to the offshore kind of drilling and mining sector. I'm not an expert on what wage rises in those areas have been, but yeah, look, I think there has to be. I mean, the principle of the Accord, and again, no one's proposing that you go back to the Accord and that kind of fixed wages and inflation model, but the principle of the Accord broadly was that there would be compromises given from the industrial sector as well as compromises given from business. And I think it works, and it worked in the past. And the current model isn't working. So let's go back to what can work for us.
Seselja, let me ask you then, what's wrong with the idea of having some concessions from both sides, some understanding or grand compact, as Paul Howe's put it? What did you make of that?
Well, look, in theory, there's nothing wrong with unions and other employees and corporations and owners working together. But it's very difficult, David, in an atmosphere when we see standover tactics from unions, when we see bullying, when we see thuggery, when in some cases we see outright corruption and criminality on some of our building sites in particular. It's difficult to have a reasonable relationship where we see unions and business working together. So the theory of it, David, is a very good one. We do want to see harmony on our work sites. We do want to see more productivity. But whilst we see some of the tactics employed by unions that have been exposed just in recent days, and of course we've seen over a period of time many examples, it is very, very difficult in that sort of atmosphere. The atmosphere of intimidation that we've seen on our building sites in particular, it's difficult to properly negotiate. Now, I would like to see a position where that sort of thing didn't happen. That's where I think things like the ABCC are very important, and we can get to a position where there are more reasonable relations. But at the moment, I know many small business people, small builders who experience that kind of thuggery and that kind of intimidation, and when that sort of thing's going on.
Do you say to them when they raise those problems with you, have you called the police? Isn't that what they should do if there's criminal behaviour?
In some cases, it's appropriate that they call the police. In other cases, it's not. They're not easily able to identify that criminal activity, and they fear the retribution. They fear, often we see these kind of tactics used to force businesses into, for instance, negotiating an EBA. I know in the ACT, when in my home city of Canberra, when you've got a local Labor government who's not going to back them up, they know it's very difficult. So it has to be extreme behaviour before they do go to the police, and that's one of the challenges. That's why things like the ABCC is important. We need to normalise those relations.
Just to be clear,
Okay,
just to be clear, they're currently afraid to go to the police for fear of retribution, but you don't think they'd be afraid to go to the ABCC?
Well, I think that if you knew that there was a strong cop on the beat that was dedicated to cleaning up building sites, for instance, and we've seen in the past people have had the confidence, but as it stands, there is a lot of fear and intimidation, and I think until our building sites and other workplaces are cleaned up, it's difficult to see this kind of grand accord working as good as it may be in theory.
Yeah, Sam Dastyari, a response on that?
Well, I think that's a bit of a cop-out, really. Firstly, let's be clear. If there is criminal behaviour that's taken place on work sites, and if it's involved people in the trade union movement, which some of the allegations appear it has, it also has involved bikies and other organised crime, and certainly I think there's a fair few builders and people in the industry that seem to have been involved in some of these tactics. Does that need to be cleaned up? Yes. Are the police the right people to do it? Yes. But that shouldn't be, we shouldn't be looking at one industry or instances in one industry and say that is the reason why we can't, as a nation, be able to come together and say how we approach industrial relations as a whole has failed.
But specifically with the building industry, why not have this building industry watchdog to deal with some of the problems that, and it's not just one or two, plenty of people have a story about issues in the building industry.
Well, I mean, Zed and I will disagree on this, but firstly, I don't think the ABCC worked. I don't think it achieved any of the goals that it was set to achieve. I think all this behaviour and all this criminality that's being alleged, a lot of this was allegedly happening during the time the ABCC was there and was ineffective. Now, if the government wanted to turn around and say, we want to put $100 million instead of putting it, say, towards a Royal Commission, which is effectively a political witch hunt, but said we want to put $100 million towards a task force or to actually be able to get more police on the beat to be able to target this specifically, fantastic. But this is the problem with the IR debate, and I think this is what Paul was addressing today, was this idea that you take one or two narrow issues and instances, and are they significant? Yes. Should they be addressed? Yes. But that doesn't change the fact that fundamentally our IR model over the past period has seesawed back and forth, and it's time for us to create some kind of certainty. And I think that some of the business people that Zed was referring to would also welcome the opportunity to have some kind of certainty in the industrial landscape.
We're going to take a quick break. I'll give you a response after the break, Zed Seselja, and also look at the debate around penalty rates, whether there is still a place for them, all of them, in today's economy. For New Zealand viewers, though, New Zealand News is next for you. Here in Australia, we'll continue this discussion. Stay with us.
Isn't it lovely to finally have more time to yourself? My better half likes pottering in the garden, especially with the grandkids. Whatever you enjoy doing though, it's important to get your affairs in order. It's not fair to leave your loved ones to pay for your funeral and bills once you've gone. That's why we chose Seniors Final Expenses Insurance from Australian Seniors Insurance Agency. If you're 50 to 79, they guarantee to accept your application. You won't need a medical or blood test, and there are no forms to fill in either. Your loved ones can get up to $15,000 if you pass away. And if your death is accidental, your chosen benefit amount triples, up to $45,000. Your family also has the choice to use the cash payout however they need. And we were surprised by the cost of cover. Premiums are less than $10 a fortnight for a 65-year-old. Seniors Final Expenses Insurance gives peace of mind for you and your loved ones. Call the Over 50s Insurance Specialist now on 1300 710 843 or visit finalexpensesinsurance.com.au.
I stopped looking at the scale at around 127, and then we started light and easy first week back at work. In the first 6 to 9 months, I'd lost 25, 30 kilos, and life was different.
A whole new Dave started to come out at work, enthusiastic and maybe a little bit cheeky.
I think people at work just started seeing me eating all the time, and I was losing weight, and I had more energy. I mean, the list goes on. I can eat food and lose weight. Yeah, it's very cool.
The world is full of beautiful things, butterfly wings, fairy tale kings, and each new day undoubtedly brings still more beautiful things. The world abounds with many delights, magical sights, fanciful flights, and those who dream on beautiful nights dream of beautiful things. Beautiful days for sunshine blazing, beautiful skies and shores. Beautiful days when I can gaze in beautiful people like you.
Looks like Mike's going to be off work for a few months after his accident.
Hope you'll be okay.
But this is exactly why I've been on at you about income protection.
Hi, I really need to sort out some income protection.
I can give you a quick quote and help you apply right now with no paperwork or medical required. As an Australian resident, you can apply for an income replacement benefit of up to 75% of your regular monthly income, and your premiums are usually tax deductible too.
Sounds good.
So call Real Insurance now on 1300 158 602. We'll be there.
Welcome back to PM Agenda. Our panel continuing in just a moment. First, a quick check of the news headlines. Here's Helen Daly.
Thanks very much, David. Schapelle Corby may soon walk free from her Bali jail cell after Indonesia's Justice Minister announced he would review her parole in the next 3 days. But he insists the Australian will get no special treatment, with her case to be treated the same as the 1,700 others before him. The 36-year-old was caught in 2004, attempting to smuggle more than 4 kilograms of marijuana into Bali in a bodyboard bag. Ms Corby has always maintained her innocence. The National Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union has called for a new deal with business and government in a move to try and move the industrial system beyond the work choices and the fair work eras. Paul Howes has begun initial talks between business groups on the idea of a grand compact on industrial relations. Mr Howes said the current IR system has become a blood sport and is dragging the Australian economy down. The big banks have been put on notice after the federal court found the ANZ guilty of breach of contract for charging excessive late credit card fees. ANZ will have to pay back tens of millions of dollars in damages, with the rest of the big three banks warned that they'll face a customer class action of their own. Legal firm Morris Blackburn says the decision is a landmark for all Australian consumers. But ANZ maintains the implications are still far from clear, and it's likely to be some time until the matter's finally resolved. A Sydney court has heard more than a year before Lisa Harnham was thrown off her balcony by her fiancé. She told a colleague she feared he'd kill her and make it look like suicide. The colleague, who hasn't been named, did not give evidence during Simon Gattani's trial last year. The woman told Gattani's sentencing hearing in the Supreme Court today that Ms Harnham had confided in her about her troubles with fiancé Simon Gattani, including an incident in which Gattani had implied that he'd poisoned her food. There's been a development in the murder case of Australian baseballer Chris Lane in the United States, with one of the teenagers charged now turning on his co-accused. 16-year-old James Edwards Jr. will testify in order to have the charges against him reduced. The three teenagers have previously told police they shot and killed the Australian because they were bored. A look at tomorrow's weather forecast around the nation. It'll be warming up under sunny skies in the south, wet and stormy across the tropics. David, that's it from the newsroom for the moment. Back to you for PM Agenda.
Helen, thank you very much for that. We're talking this afternoon to Labor Senator Sam Dastyari and Liberal Senator Zed Seselja. Zed Seselja, I'll go back to you. Talking about industrial relations, we've had a debate too about penalty rates in particular. Today. Is there a place still for penalty rates, do you think, in Australia?
Yes, there is, David, but can I just come back to Sam's point before the break? The Labor Party wants to hide behind this and say, well, if there's any problems, go to the police. But we've seen in the past when there has been issues around systemic problems or systemic corruption, we've seen the Fitzgerald inquiry, we've seen the Wood Royal Commission. Those kind of powers are needed to get to the bottom of it, where we have problems with individuals and organisations which have a special place under the law, and unions have a special place under the law. So
we need a Royal Commission?
Well, I believe we do, but certainly we need, at the very least, the ABCC, which has Royal Commission-like powers, because that is the only way you can get to the bottom of it. It is a cop-out.
So does the National Crime Commission.
Well, but this is specific to this issue. The National Crime Commission doesn't have the resources to be constantly going onto building sites and examining corruption. The Building and Construction Commission was established because we saw not just one or two instances of corruption and unlawful and unreasonable practice. We saw widespread problems, and we're seeing them again. And the revelations we've seen in the last week or so are not just the tip of the iceberg, I think. but are quite significant in and of themselves. And I think the Labor Party seems desperate to sweep this under the carpet.
I disagree with your facts there, and I don't think that's what the Cole Commission found at all. But that's a
look. Let's move on. Let's move on. Penalty rates. Seselja, you said no, they shouldn't be removed. Should some though? Are there some penalty rates, particularly in retail and hospitality, that small business often complain about? Do you believe they are hurting employment?
Well, look, I think there's a couple of points. First, we do believe that the Fair Work Commission or an independent umpire should be making decisions on things like penalty rates, and Tony Abbott has made that very clear. I said in my maiden speech, for instance, David Speers, that we need to have a conversation about whether or not it is reasonable, whether or not it is good policy, where we see cafes and restaurants and other businesses closing on Sundays because the penalty rates are so high. Is that good for employees who may be looking for extra work and can't get it? Is that good for business? Is that good for the public? I would say there's an argument that it's not, and that's the kind of conversation we need to have. But
so they should go?
Sorry? No, I'm not saying they should go. No, that's... don't verbal me, please, David. What I've said is...
I'm just asking. Sure. You built an argument there for removing them.
Well, we've got to look at the reasonableness of these things over time, and that's what the Fair Work Commission should be doing. It always needs to be balancing the rights of workers, the importance of good and proper and fair conditions, but also the ability of businesses to employ people, because if we set them too high, what we do see, David, is that many businesses just close. They close either on those days or they close altogether. That's not good for those who are... That's not good for the mum who's looking for extra work on the weekends. It's not good for the uni students who are looking for work. It's not good for the public generally. So I think that's a very reasonable discussion that has to be had.
Sam Dastyari, what about some of those penalty rates for a small business, a cafe that wants to open on a Sunday but faces a huge cost to do so?
I think where we have to be really careful, David, is we're actually talking about here some of the lowest paid, most vulnerable workers in Australian society. And, sorry, you know, the whole concept of penalty rates has actually been a way in which we've allowed a lot of lower income earners into these professions and these jobs. Look, a lot of people do use it to supplement their incomes. That's just the reality of the very, very low paid jobs.
But are they all at the right rate at the moment?
If you're saying the proposition was increase the minimum wage but reduce penalty rates, I think that is a conversation worth having, but that's not really what's being proposed here.
So hang on, just on that, you are in favour of lifting the base rate and bringing down some of those penalty rates?
Well, look, I don't want to look at the specifics. I want to work out who is or isn't being impacted on it. But what I'm worried about where this debate is going now, it's about taking something away from some of the lowest paid workers, some of the most vulnerable workers in Australian society. That's what worries me.
Okay, but if I can come to that, David, I mean, I think the point Sam makes there is not an unreasonable point. But no one in the coalition is arguing for taking these things away. What we're arguing for is that the Fair Work Commission should do its job and balance these things in much the same way that Sam has just suggested there. We should have a reasonable conversation about these things, and we shouldn't have a situation where any time any employer or anyone else raises issues about costs that someone screams blue murder and says, well, you're going to take away conditions. Let's look at the overall conditions that promote economic growth, that support our most vulnerable workers, but also that help our economy grow and help more people be employed in the long run.
And let me ask you a slightly related question flowing on from the decision not to give any money to SPC. Should, Seselja, first to you, should the workplace conditions be a factor in deciding whether the government's going to pump taxpayers' money into a business?
Well, look, I think it's obviously one of the things that gets considered. You know, I think in the end, these are always difficult judgments. And what the government has signalled is that it will be rare. It won't never happen, but it will be rare that we see lots and lots of handouts to businesses. The case will have to be a very, very strong one, and in some cases the case will be made out. In this case, the Cabinet made the decision that the case hadn't been made out. It no doubt considered a number of factors. I wasn't in those Cabinet deliberations, but one of them would have been whether or not SPC Ardmona had done all it could to try and make their business as efficient and as productive as possible, and I think that's a very reasonable thing for the government to take into account.
And Sam Dastyari, finally to you on industry support. We are seeing the government define pretty clearly a hardline position on no industry support. Is Labor going to have to better define where it stands on this?
Well, firstly, I'd say I disagree with the premise. I don't think they've been very clear at all. I think they've been a little bit all over the shop at the moment. Yes, they've said that we're not going to have a car industry. They're not prepared to bail out SPC. But then on the other hand, you've got Cabri.
Don't make stuff up, Sam. Come on.
And also, And also, I think the debate that's going to be interesting is where we head with Qantas in the next couple of months. I mean, you saw what happened with Virgin today. I think what happens with Qantas in the next couple of months is going to be telling. But look, the Labor Party is in opposition. We will have an opportunity to develop a new forward-looking industry policy, and we'll do that in due course.
We look forward to that. Sam Dastyari, Seselja, good to talk to both of you this afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks very much,
Take a
David.
break.
Thanks, Sam.